Welcome back. Alan Brugler and Dan Basse joining us this weekend. Well, a lot to talk about with the markets. Starting off with Monday, just an impressive move with wheat. Wheat prices up the limit. Alan, when you look back to how things started on Monday, was it truly some changes with the Russia and Ukraine situation, or did something else drive that?
Well, I think you had a technical setup that made us vulnerable or fertile ground for a rally. And then you had the uncertainty about the Russian situation when they started destroying port infrastructure and basically taking Ukraine out for a longer period of time. Then they hit the barges, which was your relief valve, where you expected the grain was going to go next. We had to put a little risk premium in there. And then it kind of fed on itself. Shorts were scrambling to cover. The funds were pushing their advantage if they were long already. And you ended up with Chicago pushing limit up for a day there.
Well, Dan, in our July Ag Economist Monthly Monitor survey, one economist said, listen, we're not at worst case scenario yet when it comes to this grain deal. If Russia would get hit, maybe with a vessel of wheat or with oil, that's when things would change. Do you agree with that?
No, I do. And for a while, Russia was down where the Azov Sea and the Kerch Bridge, if you will, was down. So their exports out of the Azov were shut off. It only takes one sinking a vessel under the Kerch Bridge or nearby. The drafts there are only 25 to 30 feet, and that whole area would be shut down. Now, that's 35% of Russian wheat trade. Last year, they exported 48 million tons. So it's a bunch, and that's what the world wheat miller and importer is really worried about.
At the same time, Dan, Russia, the wheat crop there, I mean, it sounds like it's going to be a really big crop. Is that the case?
I think it's going the other way. We are estimating based on yield data coming in from the key provincial areas, somewhere around 83 million tons. USDA is at 85. So we've been trimming. Spring wheat crop will also be down. But really what bothers us is the quality. Too much rain in some areas of the key export areas. And so falling numbers are coming down. Protein levels will be lucky to exceed 12.5%. A lot of wheat will be in that 10.5 to 11.5% rate. And key importers like Nigeria and others may not be able to use Russian wheat. So that may force it to the EU or other countries. I think it's pretty important longer term, and it tells me that the world wheat market has made a longer term bottom.
Well, as we see this escalation take place, Alan, there's some questions on if we're going to see Ukrainian grain actually make it through the EU. Do you continue to think that this situation will impact grains in the near term?
I think you're going to see an impact from it. I don't anticipate that it'll be as wild as it was in 2022 when the invasion originally happened. I think at that point we all bets were off. It was the first land war in Europe since the 1940s. So we built a lot of risk premium in there. We also were very vulnerable at that time because the Canadians had just had a drought. Supplies were tight in the export side of things. What's a little different now is while world stocks usage ratios are still snug, ex-China particularly, we know that there'll be some substitution, some diversion of grain flows. It might depress prices or boost prices temporarily as you use country A buys from country C instead of country B, but ultimately I think you don't have quite the same pop that you had in 2022. Having said that, wheat probably had a nice cycle low, trading cycle low, harvest low there in earlier in the spring. So we are looking for a seasonal rally in wheat. Corn's a little different situation, but if wheat goes strong, then I think it'll drag corn higher too.
Well, another big market mover this week, weather. So, Dan, as you look at last week and the expectations for the heat, but also the spotty chances of rain showers, what commodity did it impact the most this week?
Well, it impacted corn, soybeans, and spring wheat. It was across the board. It was that hot. Montana all the way up until Nebraska and then catching over to Illinois. So crop conditions, we believe, will be down 2 to 3% on Monday in corn, soybeans, and spring wheat. We'll see how it all plays out. But, it's the weather during August, which will be the big determinant, and especially for the soybean crop. So as we look at it, we're sitting today at about a 173 corn yield. We're looking at soybeans at around 50.5. We'll see how Mother Nature treats us going forward. That's down from USDA. It's not a disaster, but it's surely not the kind of crop we could have had.
All right. Well, Alan, he recently had a crop tour, so we're going to get some insight on that. Plus, some Chinese demand coming in. Could more be on the way? We'll talk about that with Dan and Alan later on the show.